The first image he told me about was of Myticus, the highest peak of Mount Olympus. He said he could see the gods there and tried to show others, but they could never see. He texted me, "One day I'll have to put it all alone at the beginning of a video with a long stretch of black before and after. If they don't see the gods, at least they'll see the black." He told me about the last of a species of sparrow that died in Disney World. A single dead sparrow in the midst of the American fantastic. NASA had driven the dusky seaside sparrow to extinction in its race to the moon. The sparrow's native swamps were drained to make way for scientists, engineers, and astronauts who wouldn't tolerate the mosquitoes on which the sparrows subsisted. Hamlet said that there's a special providence in the fall of a sparrow. If true, then God knew from the beginning that the dusky seaside sparrow would have to be eradicated so that humans could reach the moon. He sent me a link to a Wikipedia article about augury, the ancient Roman practice of interpreting omens from the behaviour of birds. He said he had seen more and more people visiting the northwest quadrant, searching for any sign of birds. He told me about a prison being built in the northwest quadrant on land that was once the Great Salt Lake. Historically, low water levels resulting from withdrawals for industrial, agricultural, and economic activities had opened the land to development. He warned me about dust storms and wildfires, and wondered how people could forget, how they could act as people apart from history. He read to me from a book by two German philosophers, displaced by some 20th century war. They thought abstraction was used to level out nature, to make it repeatable and subject to industrialization. They thought abstraction was used to subjugate, to increase the distance from subject to object, and that this was the source of fascism. He texted me, "Driving back from the quadrant now, no sign of orchids." He had been visiting the northwest quadrant weekly for the past several months, looking for an endangered species of orchid that was once abundant in the floodplains of the Great Salt Lake. He told me how the Latin name for the species, diluvialis, meant "of the flood," and how you are more likely to find the flower in an over-irrigated horse pasture than a floodplain. Floodplains are rare now, and more likely to be paved over for an Amazon distribution warehouse than provide habitat to an orchid. I googled Speranthus diluvialis and read how the flower, like other orchids, depends on a symbiotic relationship with fungi to reproduce, the primary reason it's so difficult to propagate orchids in captivity. The fungi share nutrients and information with plants through mycorrhizal networks. Entire ecosystems are thought to be listening in on these conversations, gleaning information about changes in their environment. When I asked him what he was hoping to understand from all of this, he responded, "My focus is the terraqueous globe and a limited set of ideas and images through which the northwest quadrant has placed itself in relation to universal space and time, both on the globe's surface and within the greater cosmos." I googled this. It was from a book by Marxist geographer Dennis Cosgrove called Apollo's Eye, a cartographic genealogy of the Earth in the Western imagination. For him, the northwest quadrant was the terraqueous globe, the valley, our solar system, and so on. He wanted to understand the limited set of ideas and images through which early 21st century culture had placed itself in relation to universal space and time. Jameson argued that postmodern culture and, by extension, early 21st century culture had lost the ability to think historically, undermining any kind of position on universal space and time. But an ahistorical position is still a position. Maybe what was lacking in the 21st century mind was what Freud called the oceanic feeling. He got the idea from writer and friend Romain Rolland, who got the idea from Hindu mystic Ramakrishna. Freud said that in childhood, the ego does not distinguish itself from the world of objects, but in adulthood, this distinction is rigidly maintained, creating distance between oneself and the external world. But even the feeling of our own ego is subject to disturbances, and its boundaries are not constant. That's where the oceanic feeling comes in. It's a sensation of eternity, a feeling of something limitless, unbounded, oceanic. We cannot fall out of this world. It is a feeling of an indissoluble bond, of being one with the external world as a whole. It is the source of religious energy. One may rightly call oneself religious on the grounds of this oceanic feeling alone, even if one rejects every belief and every illusion. The great earthquakes this year helped me to grasp something. Ramakrishna wrote in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna of an ocean of consciousness without limit, and that from it come all things of the relative plane, and in it they merge again. These waves arising from the great ocean merge again in the great ocean. On the morning of the first great quake, I saw the waves arise and merge again. For the succeeding quakes, I didn't even get out of bed. He dropped me a pin. He was on the summit of a lower peak overlooking the valley. He had set up a tripod and camera to record the planes landing in the northwest quadrant. They come from the south, and air traffic has increased so much that they line up single file, waiting to land against the backdrop of the mountains, open pit mines, and copper smelters. Tilt the camera 15 degrees, and an endless ribbon of automobile traffic bisecting the valley is in the frame, crossing over underground waterways that once filled the Great Salt Lake every spring. Now their water is siphoned off by a million showerheads and sprinklers. He said he had been looking for examples in art, literature and film in which the boundaries between the human body and machines become disturbed, allowing communion between the two. This situation requires that the ego has been divorced from the world of objects, repressing the oceanic feeling and precluding communion with the external world. Repression of the oceanic feeling allows for abstraction, and abstraction allows for the production of machines. Losing the oceanic feeling produces a desire in humans to return to it. They often act out this desire with machines, equating them with God. In modern times, Charlie Chaplin works in a factory turning bolts to make something we never see. The faster he turns bolts, the faster the assembly line moves. He can't stop his own repetitive motion, turning invisible bolts even when he takes a break. There are 10 title cards used in the film. Here are the first 8. Modern Times, a story of industry, of individual enterprise, humanity crusading in the pursuit of happiness. What's the use of trying? Happy in his comfortable cell. It's paradise, and time marches on into the late afternoon. Sing, never mind the words. Alone and hungry. Get me out of here. Human history is the history of pushing up against the material limits of the human body. Machines are employed as a prosthesis to exceed these limitations. In an attempt to surpass its evolutionary development, humanity has entered into a Faustian bargain at the expense of the environment, the soul, and the body. Much like the human body, the Earth also has material limitations. Earth scientists refer to them as planetary boundaries. In the opening scene of the film Andrei Rublev, a man tries to fly a balloon made from animal skins. People rush around, preparing the flying machine, and then it rises up, floating above the earth, with the view of the ground rolling beneath. But then the balloon plummets, like a fallen angel, and the last we see of it is a steaming collapsed lung in the filthy margins of a river. Tarkovsky's Solaris starts with long takes of natural landscapes, which include a great deal of water. Perhaps this was done to ensure viewers felt a strong sense of nostalgia once the Solarists were in the space station, far from water, far from home. He and I stayed up late one night several weeks ago, trying to recall the smell of rain.